I guess from culture's a thing that happen when no one's looking, right? Whether you're running a business or whether you're working in a large multinational, you can pretty much see how the culture or how effective the culture is in terms of what's actually happening when the boss isn't there.
Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined by a brand new guest. I know we have a lot of recurring guests, but it's always great to have a brand new face, or voice, I should say, on the podcast. Brad Parsons, who's the CEO and co-founder of Reliability, all the way in Australia, so in completely different time zones at the moment. But we're going to have a really great conversation today. It's something we at Senseye Predictive Maintenance, the team within Siemens, we're often talking about this cultural shift required for embracing predictive maintenance. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. And it'll be great to get Brad's unique sort of perspective on this. But I guess before we go into the topic in more detail, Brad, if you could just sort of introduce yourself to the audience, that'd be really cool.
Hi everyone, my name is Brad Parsons. Niall might have mentioned I've got a business called Reliability. I'm the CEO and founder of that business, but I also might try and talk through another business that I founded prior to Reliability called Movis. Movis is a product and services business, but Reliability is a consulting and solutions business. So two sides of that coin. One has built a product, multiple products, and gone to market with services attached. That's Movis. And with Reliability, we're really a consulting house. So we have our in-house methodologies, but we also bring the best of breed solutions from around the world, such as the Siemens product, Senseye in particular. But yeah, excited to be here and see where this goes.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thanks for joining us. And what I like about that is so essentially what you're saying, completely independent in the sense that, you're not, focused on Siemens, for example, but it's actually what's, talking to the customers and understanding what do they need and then picking, not as easy as this, picking off the shelves, what you think's and putting it together, orchestrating. I mean, what you described yourself just before we came on air as, it's a really interesting term.
Yeah, the title, I kind of called myself on LinkedIn when you can find me as ecosystem orchestrator. I don't see myself as a CEO traditionally, like I was with the Movis business. With Reliability, we're more about generating value outside the business than inside the business. So that's really trying to find, as I said, best of breed solutions, best of breed technologies, and bringing them together to solve the customer's problem. There's no customer's problem, unfortunately, is exactly the same. You need to kind of bring different capabilities to the fore and really understand the challenges that they're trying to solve.
And I guess what we're covering today is an important, but maybe you disagree or agree, but an overlooked aspect of like adopting new technologies, which is this cultural element. So from your point of view, Brad, you've been involved in many sort of projects, around technology, but how would you sort of define cultural adoption in the context of adopting new technologies?
I guess from culture's a thing that happen when no one's looking, right? Whether you're running a business or whether you're working in a large multinational, you can pretty much see how the culture or how effective the culture is in terms of what's actually happening when the boss isn't there. So I certainly know that from experience. But I guess in terms of understanding how culture supports technology adoption, I did a similar sort of webinar last year, and I was asked to kind of define that in more specifics. And there's looking back at my experience and looking back and talking to others, there's really kind of four cultures, if you like. There's a collaborative culture. There's a control culture, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. There's a compete culture, that always wants to be the first and the best. And then there's a create culture, which is the invented here syndrome, which can work against you if you're a technology provider. Really is trying to understand the culture that's present. And maybe there's a cultural transformation going on as well as part of a digital transformation effort, but really understanding the foundation of what's there particularly if you're a technology or services provider, knowing what you're going into really understands it. I mean, people define culture in many ways, but that's it. That's kind of how I see it.
And you mentioned those different areas. Is that quite broadly? Can that be quite broadly used to define implementations of all different types of products? I mean, maybe today we're leaning towards predictive maintenance, but if we talk about other products as well, can it be broadly applied to other products as well?
Absolutely. I think it can be broadly applied. Fortunately, my wife's a change manager of 30 years, so I kind of hear this, and she's run large program teams as the head of change. So I kind of hear a lot of this, not just at home, but at work, not just at work, but at home as well. Depending on that culture that's present, that will really influence the way in which you want to engage in terms of predictive maintenance. And we'll talk through it a little bit further, but maybe there's multiple cultures that actually exist. And particularly in the sort of digital transformation, I've been doing these sort of projects for the last sort of 10 plus years. Back in the, sort of 2012, 2013 was when I first started. And what you'll find is culture can vary not only at the site level or the company level, but sort of down to the department level. One culture, is not dominant. You're not dealing with, the vanilla. You're actually dealing with the chocolate, the strawberry, and the vanilla. And really depends. You need to understand the audience you're working with, and you need to kind of adjust the way you work with them to be conscious of that culture. Don't assume everyone's the same, I think is probably the general guise there.
No, exactly. And I think one thing, again, we briefly spoke about before is this sort of, when you're rolling out technology globally as well, is that your becomes even more important to consider, right? So even in the same organization, doesn't mean the culture is same in this part to this part, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just reflecting back on that sort of question and really having done global deployments. With Mobus, we got out to sort of 18 countries. So with multiple different cultures span that. And, you can make assumptions. You can make assumption that the Chinese, the Japanese, the Indian culture is very top down. And, maybe stereotypically that's the case. And you look at Australia and the US where it's very bottom up. Going in with a particular approach, and in my experience in talking to some of the solutions that we provide as part of the reliability fleet or the ecosystem, selling bottom up and top down, making sure that you're addressing the needs of both of those, both of those parts of the business. The senior management, want to know things like performance. They want to know long-term visibility. Obviously, want to know financial outcomes. Whereas the shop floor, particularly in the predictive maintenance, they want to know how is it going to impact them on a day-to-day basis. They want to know what their jobs look like in the future. They want to know what tomorrow's like when they come into the shop, into the factory. You need to address all those concerns, and that is part of the cultural transformation that any technologies or any solutions in the predictive maintenance space have to understand and compensate for.
And and it's interesting you mentioned different stakeholders require different levels of engagement and that kind of thing. But I guess if we go into the actual detail of that in terms of how does a culture, good or bad, sort of affect the deployment of, let's say, predictive maintenance? What can affect it? What factors can affect the success or failure? Let's say.
It's quite a few. I mean, back to those sort of C's. Does the business have a culture of being able to adopt and adapt technology as part of their business? Often when we work with big multinationals, they actually have kind of figured this out a little bit, and they will have an adoption site, a site that they know is innovative, a site that is open to new ideas, that is open to be challenged. And at the plant floor and at the executive level, there's an understanding that mistakes can happen. There's an understanding that there's an adoption and learning curve. There's an understanding that we might not have all the answers up front, but we're all sort of driving in the same direction. And I think that's one element. If I look at the success of predictive maintenance solutions, there's this sort of pivot point when you get the basics right in terms of implementation, you've got networking up and running, you've got technology deployed, you get to a point where you've kind of expanded beyond the target customer segment. Say it was the maintenance team, that's your first target audience. When you start to mature that solution and start to evolve that within the business, you have to involve other parts of the business. For production is the most obvious one, right? So if there is not a culture of working collaboratively, if there's not a culture of open and shared communication, and even shared performance indicators, there's a guy called Drew Troyer. I don't know if you come across him, but he's a real maintenance leader, and he put a note out this morning on LinkedIn. I saw that and commented. And he was actually talking about culture and cultural adoption and had a whole bunch of recommendations. But I sort of had to chime in and sort of say, in order for businesses to adopt this broadly, I think one of the key things that's often overlooked and missed is around performance metrics. If you have a team like maintenance and you have a team like production, and they're both being measured on an independent set, that's fine. But if they don't have shared performance metrics, then they're working against each other. So maintenance want to take down the machines so they can do their work. That's obvious. Production want to keep the machines running so they can get their targets as well. You've got two polar opposites trying to compete really for the same time on machines. And if you don't have universal metrics, and there's obviously the high ones, profitability, throughput, they're the big ones. But if you don't start to target down the shop floor and do operational performance metrics at the floor, the one we like to use, and it's really the foundation of reliability, is energy productivity. So that's really how much how much electricity is required to produce an output or a widget or a bottle or whatever you're producing, maybe in food and bev. But what that does is unify those two groups to say, okay, if we run this machine harder, the performance of the machine will decay. It will use more energy, right? And knowing that, you may make the call to run that. If the priority is production, then you at that time you might want to put more productivity through the business. But if you're getting to the point where that cost is driving up too highly, where it impacts the profitability of the business down to the product line, process line, bottle, for example, then you want to do that trade-off. And that kind of metric gives you a unifying way to kind of look at it. Rather than those sort of very high-level profitability, it's very targeted between those two groups, if that makes sense.
No, of course. No, it does make sense. And I guess just sort of time what you're saying together. Sorry, time what you're saying together, Brad. I guess a lot of this comes down to sort of leadership as well. At various different levels, and leadership sort of pulling together. So it's not about one person necessarily, but it's like a leadership group pulling together, maybe in those different areas that you mentioned. But how important is leadership to this whole, to the success of these type of projects?
I mean, you're kind of stating the obvious. Leadership is pretty key. If the leaders aren't able to demonstrate the behavior that they're trying to influence and the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, no one in their right mind is going to follow it. The leadership have to demonstrate the behavior that they want to see. Now, that goes all the way down to how do they make decisions, and the key part of sort of this predictive maintenance and digital adoption is really transitioning from what is sort of hero mentality or what is we've always done it that way towards more data-centric behaviors. Now, that is a big shift. There's a big shift from, we've had people in the plant for 30 years, and now they need to look at the data. Why should they have to go down that approach? And I think in my experience, you've got to work with both of those factors. You've got to transition towards a data-led, but in doing so, look to the experience of the people in the plant. They understand these machines and they understand how to operate them, and they've been there a long time. They understand how these things fail. If you're deploying sensors, for example, this experience may be able to draw upon to understand at what levels can we set alarms? At what tolerances can we can we live with? How can the technology enable the capability that's already there? We're not talking about direct replacement. What we're talking about is sort of systemizing the knowledge that's already there, building that repository so you can be repeatable and scalable. That wealth of knowledge, unfortunately, in a lot of Western worlds, is walking out the door. I'm in my mid-50s, but a lot of the customers that we talk to and work with are in their late 50s, 60s. In a very short space of time, we're going to see a lot of people walking out of the workforce. I think the US is slightly ahead of us, but certainly I know that wealth of experience is working out the door. This digital adoption we're talking about, predictive maintenance in particular, is an opportunity to help capture that. And we've seen projects, in the US and Europe and here in Australia where that is a goal of the transformation. A goal of the project is to capture that knowledge, capture that tacit, untouchable knowledge that has come with these people that have been in these plants for a long time. I think that's probably a key tenement that's probably not understood that particularly well is when you're losing that knowledge, these tools are a way to capture and retain that. So you want to kind of work with the existing skills that are there is probably a point I'd like to raise there.
And I guess that's an interesting point, what you're saying about the change in workforce, because that also, of course, means there's a change in culture as well. I mean, I guess the two go hand in hand, and it's almost not for, I guess it's forcing companies in some respects to change their culture, as that the workforce change. People have been there a long time, maybe with a certain mentality, not all the time, but a lot of the time, and that's leading to this new embrace of technologies like predictive maintenance, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you can generalize all you like, and we can do a little bit of that. So I guess a younger workforce generally tends to be more agile at technology adoption. A lot of the younger workforce is so used to technology adoption that it's a core capability or a core skill or even a core behavior in which they learn to do. The younger workforce typically looks to data, because they don't have the experience that an older workforce can draw upon. So providing them with the tools that is really supported by the workforce that's been there a long time, using those tools gives them a bit of a leg up and kind of gets the experience to be shared. So we're all looking at the same data. We're all looking at the same piece of paper. We can all start to learn. And both of those groups are going to have different perspectives. So, they come from different backgrounds. They come from different sort of skills and experiences. So having, the data to be there, having the technology to be there to look from two different lenses, same coin, different sides, I think is also invaluable as well.
Yeah, and like I said, both perspectives. It's almost you're looking for a blend of both. They both bring things to the table, right? Lots of positives to the table.
Absolutely, yeah. Just before we came on, we were talking about that sort of top down, bottom up. Those different cultural aspects. Senior leaders have a perspective they're trying to hit. They have goals and targets they're trying to hit. People in the shop floor have a different set of targets, but ultimately, they're working towards the same outcomes, but they're measured differently. And I think that's probably kind of key. Understanding how people are measured is probably a real indication of, the sort of culture that's there. Trying to understand it, a person's KPI will pretty quickly tell you kind of the behavior that's going to result from that. And I guess what any solution needs to, or any services or any external parties need to be aware of is if you are driven by really short-term KPIs, really short-term metrics, then you will get a reactive behavior, because that's the time and window. If you look at predictive maintenance per se, what we're trying to do is take the measurement windows out longer and longer. A reactive maintenance is a very short-term perspective. It breaks, we fix it, right? And if that's the horizon and that's the metrics that have been driven by the business, that's the culture that's been driven by the business. What you're trying to do is actually sort of get ahead of the game, trying to rectify the issue long before it happens. That can tear down existing cultures, the sort of hero culture or the prospecting culture. We want to get in, we want to see something, we want to fix it. We want to see those gold nuggets and get those immediate rewards. I give you an example from sort of my previous work with Movis. Sometimes you can predict a failure many, many months in advance. Now, that from someone who's used to working on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis, that is just well beyond the scope of contemplation. I can think of a particular example with a customer is in the building services business. They had these big concrete vats, and the vats would mix, and the concrete had to stay mixed. As soon as the mixer failed, no surprise, the concrete had all set. Now, you can imagine when you've got a significant vat of concrete, what happens when you need to try and take the concrete out. It is a significant amount of effort. We're talking weeks of work and jackhammers and long nights. Not an ideal situation. When we spoke to the business and said, this particular vat is not looking good, we're seeing a trend that is heading towards a failure. Their first question was, well, how long? And we sort of said, well, it could be in the order of sort of 2 months, 2 to 3 months away. Oh, no problems. The next question we asked, if it was to fail, what were your next steps? So the next steps were, well, we send in a replacement. How many replacements do you have in the country? Well, that's a good question. We'll come back to you. The long story short, they only had one. It was at a particular plant. It was already set aside for another purpose. So in reality, they had none. So, the predictive maintenance tool was then used to track the deterioration of that asset over a couple of months. And they were able to nurse it towards the next major shutdown, and they were able to ship in a replacement unit. That was something that was a real wake-up call for the business. Out of that, we got literally a global deployment. It was an iconic event that had happened that really saved the business because it was, a fairly critical asset within the plant. But it was an example on which everyone could kind of relate to and latch onto. And I think that's when you're looking at culture, you need to have, I want to say it, you want to have heroes, or you want to have good examples. You want to have, examples that people can relate to. And I think that's, where solution providers and where customers in their transformation journeys need to understand that those early examples are absolute gold, because they represent a future that the existing culture doesn't have. So these shared stories, these ways in which they can, kind of communicate value about where we're going and why we're going. And, maybe it's a safety issue. I've seen other examples where sort of 3 to 5 meter fan woke up the supervisor in the middle of the night with a critical failure that was imminent. Now, that unfortunately, and I guess fortunately, that critical fan, if it had have sheared off, would have went through a populated area about 3 a.m. in the morning, and seriously could have done some damage. There's humans there. The guards weren't up to scratch. They hadn't, kept the maintenance up. It would have torn through the guards. It would have, heaven forbid, torn through people. But again, safety, a shared example. This is why we kind of need this technology. Anchoring to existing cultural norms, for example, safety, is what we're looking to do, because then it becomes much easier for that transformation of that culture. because it is already reinforcing an existing culture. That might be saving money, that might be safety, that might be, half a dozen different things, but make sure it reinforces an existing culture that's already there would be, how I'd kind of try and phrase that.
Yeah, there's really good examples there as well. I mean, we tend to, when we're talking to customers, it's not. We see it's crucial, really, both for us to to see the success, but also for, more importantly, for customers to see the success and then share that success internally. So we capture these sort of what we call asset successes. So if Senseye spots an issue with a machine, it saves 24 hours in downtime, and we even add some of the guidance our sort of co-pilot gave, which led to it as well. There's actually a really good podcast, which I think I've shared with you, Brad, from our customer BlueScope Steel, where Chris Wanson from the BlueScope team actually describes this in a lot of detail, how it sort of, and again, for them, it was the safety issue was they had to, because it was quite a dangerous, tricky part to get to actually fix it. So it's actually a risk to actually go in. So they wanted to make sure they did it at the right time with the right. So again, it's a safety measure in mind. So from your point of view, capturing the successes and communicating them internally is how you breed this culture of, adoption around predictive maintenance and building sort of momentum behind that deployment, I guess, the global deployment, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, absolutely. Find sites, as I said before, find sites that are ready, they are willing, they are able to kind of have those change. As I said, iconic sites, there will be a technology adoption plan for the more established multinational players. There will be a site that typically receives the technology first because the culture is there to support it. And if it's not a single site, maybe it's a supervisor, maybe it's a particular part of the plant who is open to new ideas, who is willing to experiment, who's willing to learn and willing to fail. Nothing's perfect. But that's the kind of culture you're trying to look for in the adoption of predictive maintenance.
And I've been looking to ask this question throughout, and it's one that's actually towards the beginning of the list, because it actually sort of makes sense, because I wanted to ask about sort of a definition of predictive maintenance, because I'm wondering whether that affects the culture as well. So if you have one part of the organisation thinks, predictive maintenance is this, this, and this, and the other part of the organisation, or different, production to senior leadership, everyone has a different interpretation of predictive maintenance. And I know from the market, there's a lot of products, in the market that say they do predictive maintenance or AI or whatever, and they don't really. In reality, it's sort of an empty cupboard. So does that cause some friction in terms of the culture? Because maybe expectations are all messed up as well. Someone has some big expectations here, or maybe low expectations here. I don't know, but yeah.
I think you're really spot on when you say that. There is definitely a misalignment of expectations. If you look at traditionally maintenance environments, preventative maintenance, everyone understands that. Reactive maintenance, everyone understands that. And you may have preventative maintenance with condition monitoring, right? So that might be part of it. You might have tribology, you might have a vibration expert or a VA that comes in, does your vibration analysis, every a couple of weeks or a month. What we're talking about when we're talking predictive maintenance is you're going from this human-supported decisions, which is those reactive and preventive. So they're very human-centered decisions. What we're talking about is with predictive maintenance is more data-centered decisions, and that's probably the key. What people often miss is there a transition step, and the willingness to change your maintenance strategy, even if it's not across the whole business, is really key to this transformation. Transitioning from a preventative maintenance towards a predictive maintenance, there's a key step in between, and that's condition-based maintenance. So are we using the condition of the machine to drive the prioritization of when that maintenance happens and potentially what maintenance happens? It depends on how advanced you are. I think predictive maintenance, the key part is really, is it data-enabled decision-making? You could go further down the track and say, prescriptive. But I think one of the things that I do really want to call out is predictive maintenance is more than identification of maintenance. Let's say you identify that VAT was going to fail next Thursday. You need to predict, and schedule. Am I going to have a person that's trained, skilled, and able to maintain that machine next Thursday? Am I going to have the spare parts available? Am I going to be able to get access to the plant and shut down that production line, for example? Do I have all of the elements in place to enable that predictive maintenance strategy? Otherwise, what happens, and I've seen it, and this is the miscommunication of expectations, you can predict an asset will fail and you can do absolutely nothing about it. Right? And that's a real thing. That absolutely happens day in, day out. There's no point in predicting, weeks and months in advance if you don't have the capability to take action. Otherwise, that's a fairy tale. And to get cultural adoption, to get cultural acceptance, it's more than identification of a failure in advance. It's about a systems view, and this is really predictive maintenance. This is what we're missing when they're thinking is, do we have the full systems to not only identify it, but to schedule it, to plan it, to prioritize it, and to complete it? And then the backside of that predictive maintenance is, do we have the data to support the decision that we made to say it was a good one? Are we in a feedback loop where the data that supported the decision is reinforced by the action taken? You may predict that you're going to get an impeller failure on a pump, but if you pull open the pump and find there's nothing wrong with the impeller, it's a really great way culturally to kill your program, because the boy who cried wolf, that's not going to happen too many times if you don't have the technology to do that. But if you also aren't preparing them for the fact that it might be the impeller, but it might be these three other things, give them the data to be able to understand that, then you're kind of missing the trick. You're killing your cultural adoption at the very start. So in short, it's a systems-based change, but it's also a behavior change. We need to we're changing the systems in which the plant works, but also changing the mindset and the behavior of those people in the plant. We're setting their expectations, as you said at the start. We've got to manage the expectations on both of those accounts.
No, fantastic. And I guess as we sort of come towards the end of our time, what we usually do on the podcast, Brad, is sort of summarise. We've covered quite a lot of ground. There's been really fascinating conversation, but I guess, and I think it's a bit of an unfair question because there's so many facts involved, and it's not, as we discussed, it's not an easy thing to achieve. But if someone is looking to adopt predictive maintenance and they're thinking about the cultural side of things, how can they get their organisations be engaged with the project, understand the project, what we're trying to achieve, and bring in stakeholders together? What would be those sort of initial steps to think about? Even though there's a lot to consider, maybe there's some sort of initial steps just to think through first, maybe.
Yeah, I think the success or failure of a predictive maintenance project is not about technology. It's about any meaningful change, whether it's predictive maintenance or others, is about the people. Foremost, this is about helping people to move from one state to another, and this is exactly what we're talking about. This is cultural adoption. The projects that, in my experience, that I've seen are most successful, it's got nothing to do with how fancy sexy the dashboards are or the sensors are, but it's about those customers or those projects where the data is trusted. If you get the trust from the data, then the decisions can follow that. Then the actions can happen from that. Then the success comes, and that success breeds success. The more reinforced behavior that you get, the more the more the guy on the plant floor goes home and says, "You wouldn't believe it, this technology saved my bacon," whether it's a safety incident, unfortunately, hopefully not, whether it's shutting down the production, managed to avoid shutting down production. Over the next year, I guess over the next few years, we're just going to see more and more of that. And I've been working on this for 10 years. I started Movis back in 2015. So I've seen the transformation, but we're now at a point where the technology is in a really good state. The Senseye product's fantastic. And the reason why I'm so excited about Senseye is it pulls from multiple data sources. We're not looking at a single source. We're looking at multiple perspectives. And that's really the fundamentals of success in predictive maintenance, is enabling a workforce to work collaboratively, to work together, to work on common metrics, to work on common data. And that's what really cultural success is for me. When you get a group of people working together towards the same goals, operating in the same channel, I think that's where we get the success. And just deploying technology for technology's sake will not get you there. Having a group of people working together in unison, that's where all the successes are going to happen. That's where all the wins are happening, in my experience over the last couple of years. That's probably the best summary I can get. But really, the reality is, we talked about it earlier, if you have a workforce that's transitioning out, this kind of technology is not about pure growth. This is about survival. Your skills and your experience are going out the door. This kind of technology will keep you on par. How well you're able to deploy and implement that within your culture and within your business will determine how successful you are after that. So we're looking at steady state. Successful deployments and cultural adoptions will be the determining factor.
Excellent, and that's really great advice for people to take away. But I guess also, Brad, just as we finish, in terms of if people want to find out more about you and reliability and what you're doing, where are the best places for them to do that?
By all means, hit me up on LinkedIn. Got thousands and thousands of followers. Been on LinkedIn, I think, since about 2003. I think I was in very early. But yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If you ping me, I'll get back to you pretty quickly, and then probably in 24 hours.
Fantastic. Well, we'll add a link to your profile in the show notes as well, so people can easily reach out to you. But hopefully, we'll also have you back on the podcast as well. Just throwing that out there and putting it on the record. But no, it's been really great to chat and just get an external perspective. Because, like I said, we do talk a lot about it in Siemens and with the Senseye platform and adoption. But it's really great to get that external perspective and from all the projects you've been on. So thank you so much for your time and for staying so late as well in your day.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.